Hey, everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News this week. The live stream I'm going to attempt to do at least once a week. Last week I did it on a Wednesday, but this past Wednesday I did a live stream of an interview with Steve Smelsky about Naegleria fowleri. You can check out if you look down the feed or go to the YouTube page, Outbreak News TV. And what I want to do today is go over, like last week, some of the news that I find, quite frankly, pretty interesting, and hopefully you do too. And I wanted to start out with something I kind of put on the back burner. I was planning on doing this last week, but so it's a little bit of an older story, but it's pretty important, particularly if you're like me, you're in the United States, and I want to talk about African swine fever. If you're not familiar with it, this is a very highly contagious and deadly viral disease that affects both domestic and feral swine of all ages. So we see it in pig farms, we see it in boars and other types of pig animals. ASF, African swine fever, is not a threat to human health and cannot be transmitted from pigs to humans, and it's not a food safety issue. However, it's a potentially massive economic issue for a lot of places. African swine fever is found primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. We see it in Europe. And if you go back to 2018, the first outbreak appeared in China. And I think that was the first one in Asia. And since then, we have seen a number of countries in Asia have issues with African swine fever. I think the number now is up to 16 countries, and millions of pigs have been culled because of this. And it's a massive economic strain on these countries. Let me take a look at the next slide. And why would I be concerned about the United States? Well, this is why. What we saw was this came out late last month, and this is from the USDA, and there was a confirmation of African swine fever in the Dominican Republic. That's a hair under 1,000 miles away from the Florida coast. The USDA Foreign Animal Disease Diagnostic Lab confirmed African swine fever in samples collected from pigs in the Dominican Republic through an existing cooperative surveillance program. So what is African swine fever? It's a pathogenic disease of swine and pigs. Now, in the Dominican Republic, at that time, they reported 389 pigs were positive in 3 different provinces. That soon jumped to 11 different provinces in the Dominican Republic, and tens of thousands of pigs have been culled so far. Now, the unique thing about this is, the important thing is, this is actually the first time in 40 years African swine fever has been found in the Americas. The last time, in 1978 to 1980, was also in the Dominican Republic, where they had almost 400 outbreaks and about 200,000 pigs were culled. So I guess my question is, is this too close for comfort, right? It's less than 1,000 miles away now. So what is the USDA doing to protect the United States? Well, they do a lot of things with all these countries. However, they're doing, just a couple days after issuing the alert about what's going on in the Dominican Republic, The USDA issued this release, and they said they're announcing requirements for importing dogs from countries affected with African swine fever. And they go through some more updated verifications that need to be done before the dogs can be imported into the United States for resale. The dogs in their shipping crate container must be free of dirt, wood shavings, hay, straw, and any other kind of organic bedding material. All bedding that comes with a dog has to be disposed of at the U.S. post entry point. Each dog has to have an ISO compliant microchip implanted, and each dog must be bathed at the U.S. post entry point within 2 calendar days of arrival in the U.S., and this has to be documented. So, yeah, that's one of the steps they're taking, and of course they're I'm assisting the Dominican Republic with the quarantine and taking care of trying to contain it. So it's really something of a big deal. And all you have to do is take a look at Asia over the past couple of years and take a look at China and Vietnam and the Philippines and all they've gone through with African swine fever. So, important stuff. And I encourage you to check out more stories about this on the website. That's outbreaknewstoday.com. The next topic I want to talk about is last week we talked about, how transmissible and is the Delta variant of COVID-19. And we showed that the CDC initially said that through some kind of a PowerPoint that it was as transmissible as chickenpox. And the people that actually studied it and looked at the R naught, or how many people will be infected in a susceptible population from one person infected, was more like 6 or 7 instead of the 10 that chickenpox is. But the next question I had was, is it deadlier? Is the Delta variant deadlier? Well, I found a pretty good article in Live Science, and let's go ahead and take a look at that real quick. It's a good piece that attempts to answer these questions. And I got it up there now. Okay, so how deadly is the coronavirus Delta variant? We know it's more transmissible than the original strain and the alpha strain, but is it more deadly? And it says, early data suggests that the Delta variant may cause more severe disease, but more studies are needed to know if this variant is indeed deadlier. And the author is Rachel Rettner. I read a lot of her stuff. She's very good. And it says, several studies hint that compared to the original strain of the virus, the Delta variant can make people sicker if they are unvaccinated. One study from Scotland published on June 14th in The Lancet found that people infected with coronavirus Delta variant had a nearly 2-fold higher risk of being hospitalized between April and June this year, compared with those infected with the coronavirus alpha variant, which came out of the UK. But those who were vaccinated had a 60% reduced risk of being hospitalized with the Delta variant than those that were unvaccinated. Then they had another study from Canada. It was actually a preprint, so it hasn't been peer-reviewed yet, that came out last month and found that people infected with a Delta variant were twice as likely to be hospitalized and twice as likely to die as those with other coronavirus strains. Still, these studies, she says, are preliminary and more research is needed to show whether Delta really causes more severe disease than other previous variants. Delta may appear more serious than other variants simply because it has caused outbreaks in populations with more risk factors for severe illness, such as old age and underlying conditions, or because outbreaks occur in areas with more stress on the hospital systems. Now, it is also unclear how the death rate from Delta variant compares with that of other variants. The overall case fatality ratio for COVID-19 in the US since the beginning of the pandemic is 1.7%, according to Johns Hopkins. However, this fatality rate includes deaths long before the availability of COVID vaccines. Since the Delta variant took off in the US after the availability of vaccines, it is difficult to compare deaths from Delta with historical deaths from earlier variants. And the fatality rate for all variants is expected to drop as a result of vaccines. So what we do know is that the vaccine does seem to reduce the risk of infection, severe disease, and death. So I guess that's the big takeaway. And is it deadlier? That we still are not sure of, but I'm sure they'll be working on that, and we'll get some answers pretty soon. The next topic I wanted to look at real quick was something kind of unique, and I wanted to share it with you. And this was a report out of a Spanish newspaper. And let me get it up there real quick. And it says that there were 4 suspected cases of tularemia reported in friends that were out crabbing. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. And I know that's in Spanish, so I'm going to translate. I have it written down so I can translate it. And I apologize for all the ads this website gives out. But basically, it's reporting that 4 people who suffered an outbreak of tularemia, in particular suspected ulceroglandular tularemia, after handling crabs trapped in the Gelon River in the municipality of Cetina. They all presented with fever, general and respiratory symptoms in some cases, and ulcerative lesions on the hands, and axillary swelling of the lymph nodes began a few days after exposure to the crabs. None of them required hospitalization, are all doing pretty well with antibiotic treatment. Now, in Spain, the first case of human tularemia was back in 1997. And then in 1998, because when you think of tularemia, you don't always think of contracting it from crabs. Exactly. Thank you, Margie. That's really what I was thinking, from crabs when I first saw the story. So I went back a little bit and looked at this article, and it said in 1998, a small tularemia outbreak involving 19 patients occurred in Cuenca, Spain, after crayfish fishing. The patients developed glandular or ulceroglandular form of the disease through skin injuries from catching or cleaning red swamp crayfishes in the same river. So I went to go find where this study is, and let me get there real quick, or I'll try to be quick. It's a little awkward switching around from screen to screen. And let's see, where is that? Here we go. All right. Okay, and this is from it's called Revista Clínica Española. That's the journal. And what they say here is tularemia outbreak in the province of Cuenca associated with crab handling. 19 patients were diagnosed with tularemia at our hospital following an epidemic outbreak occurring in the area. They were predominantly males, median age around 60. All patients presented with ulceroglandular form. 73% of the patients received doxycycline. Only 1 patient relapsed. Water samples from the reservoir of the uh, of the river were positive for Francisella tularensis by PCR. And they conclude the most likely hypothesis of this outbreak was the contamination of the river water with animals dead from tularemia, which, together with the characteristics of the transmission mechanism, the wounds caused by the crabs, had contributed to the acquisition of this disease to people. So, yeah, there you go. Typically, when I think of tularemia, right? Again, Margie's on it, right? Bunny, right? Rabbit fever. You get it from tainted rabbits, bites from ticks, bites from deer flies, like that. Well, let's see what the CDC has to say about tularemia and some of the symptoms and the transmission. All right, and we got that up there. All right, so tularemia, a disease that can affect animals and people. Rabbits, hares, and rodents are especially susceptible and often die in large numbers during outbreaks. People can become infected in several different ways: tick and deer fly bites, skin contact with infected animals, drinking contaminated water, inhaling contaminated aerosols, and laboratory exposure. So let's take a look at the symptoms. And because tularemia comes in a lot of different forms, I think there's about 6 of them, and it really depends on how the bacteria enters the body. So the type of tularemia we're seeing in the case of these 4 um, fishermen in Spain was ulceroglandular, and this occurs. This is the most common form, as a matter of fact. Usually occurs following a tick or deer fly bite, or after handling an infected animal, and is typically a skin ulcer, as you can see in the photograph there. Then there's glandular, oculoglandular, right, the eye, oropharyngeal. This one typically results from eating or drinking contaminated food or water. Patients with oropharyngeal tularemia may have a sore throat, mouth ulcers, tonsillitis, and swelling of the lymph glands in the neck. Pneumonic, right, respiratory, and typhoidal. And this is characterized by any combination of the general symptoms without the localizing symptoms of other syndromes. So, yeah, I just thought that was a pretty interesting case. Don't always see that when we're talking about tularemia. And let me go ahead and go on to the next topic I want to discuss relatively quickly. And you may have seen this already. I don't know if you're familiar with Melioidosis, but this is a very serious bacterial infection that's primarily found in northern Australia and Southeast Asia, Thailand and that area. So, what's really interesting about these cases is, and they had a 4th case, and that's why I'm bringing it up. It was on the Health Alert Network from the CDC on the 9th, so about 11 days ago. And this is where Georgia reported a fatal case in this particular one of Burkholderia pseudomeliae infection, or also known as melioidosis. And this was from late July. And it's based on the genomic sequencing, the case closely matches the 3 other cases that have been reported this year. There's one in Kansas, one in Minnesota, and one in Texas. And it indicates that they probably share a common source of exposure. 2 of the people died, 2 survived. And the big interesting part of this is none of these cases had a history of traveling outside of the continental US, right? I just said that it's, primarily found in northern Australia, Southeast Asia. It's found in some other places too, but you don't typically find locally acquired melioidosis in the United States. So it makes the case, very, very interesting, and curious where this thing's going to go. Let me see if they recommended or they suspected. Trying to see if they suspected what the common source is. I guess they didn't go out on the limb on that. Probably wise, but yeah, just wanted to share that with you because that's a kind of an interesting case, and going to be keeping a close eye on the CDC HAN, the Health Alert Networks, and because I have no doubt they're going to continue monitoring very closely, trying to figure out, what's going on with these cases in the U.S. The next story I want to talk about, which I'm sure everybody's already heard about, but since it's Ebola, I'm obligated. It's important enough. It's, of course, the Ivory Coast and the west coast of Africa saw their first case of Ebola in a quarter century. And it looks like it was a patient that had left from Guinea and arrived in Abidjan. I believe that's the biggest capital city in Ivory Coast. Côte d'Ivoire. I don't speak French, so I'm not going to try to get the translation perfect. And it looks like the individual traveled by road and arrived in Abidjan on August 12th. I believe the person has survived so far. And the interesting thing about this is it wasn't that long ago, weeks, that the outbreak of Ebola in Guinea, the second one in 2021, was just declared over just, a few weeks ago. So don't know if there's any connection. What I do know is there's been several dozen contacts that are being followed up on. And I think I read today there were 3 suspect cases that were tested, and they all turned out to be negative. So I think that's the latest on that. And it's interesting because, it wasn't just, a week or two ago that we saw Marburg virus pop up on the west coast of Africa for the first time. So, yeah, a lot of interesting stuff going on over there. And it certainly makes my life interesting, trying to keep up on all this stuff. All right. Yeah, Margie's asking, is there any relationship between these cases? Unknown to this point. All right. And the last thing I want to talk about, which was a request actually from somebody on the Facebook live stream from last week, and they were asking if I would just talk a little bit about hyperinfection with the parasite Strongyloides stercoralis. So since it was a request, yeah, I said sure. So, and plus, parasitology is my favorite thing, so I love talking about it. And let me get something up here for you to see. All right. Oh, ads. This is from. Okay, there is the life cycle of Strongyloides, and hopefully you can see that well. And what's unique about Strongyloides is people contract it through penetration of the larva through the skin, much like with a hookworm. However, when the individual that's infected starts excreting the eggs hatch pretty quickly. And a lot of times they hatch, within the intestine or in the perianal folds in that area. And when they hatch, the larva in the intestine comes out and it transforms into the infective filariform larva, which penetrates the skin and can penetrate the skin even before the egg would get out into the environment. So it's very unique in that way. Let me see if I can go back. And this was actually this is from a little informational piece that I did 5 years ago. And I want to just talk about two unique things about, not absolutely unique, but unique enough about strongyloides. And it's autoinfection and hyperinfection. And I think this is what the viewer from Facebook Live last week was referring to. So autoinfection is a situation where the non-infective rhabdidiform larvae become infective falciform larvae before leaving the body. It penetrates the intestinal wall, perianal skin, and continues to reinfect the person. It's interesting because there's at least one text that says this can keep an individual infected for up to 35 years. So that's really, really long time. Then there's hyperinfection. And sometimes when there's autoinfection and this increasing worm burden, it can lead to dissemination and hyperinfection, particularly in somebody who is immunocompromised. Though that's not exclusive, but people with HIV infection or those taking drugs that suppress the immune system are really vulnerable to this. So disseminating strongyloides can lead to pulmonary involvement, septicemia from secondary gram-negative sepsis, shock, wasting, and death. So it's very, very serious. People on organ transplant drugs and stuff like that too. Anybody that's any kind of immunosuppressive drug. So anyway, I hope that that answers the question for that viewer from last week. I don't recall her name, so I apologize for that. But yeah, that's the stuff I wanted to talk about this week. I got another comment. Here's a comment from Abdelia from Facebook. It says, I think said, why are all these infectious diseases coming from Africa? Okay, I think that was right in the beginning of the show. So I think she was saying African swine fever. And then we have another comment from Margie, who says, Burkholderia is found in Puerto Rico also. Okay, well, thank you, Margie. I wasn't aware of that. And anyway, so that is today's Outbreak News this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any thoughts or you want to share some stories that you think are pretty interesting, I mean, go ahead and share that with me. You can share it with me on Facebook, and I'd be glad to consider it, of course. And I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next week. Oh, and if you didn't get a chance, I did do a pretty interesting interview with Dr. Christina Nelson from the CDC about plague and some new recommendations for treatment and prophylaxis of Yersinia pestis. And I linked to the YouTube video on the Facebook page, since I think all my viewers today are from Facebook. And I encourage you to check that out. It's about a half hour long, but it's very good. And Dr. Nelson is very knowledgeable on this topic. So anyway, again, thanks for watching. I appreciate everything. And I'll see you next week. Bye.